So we've already brought you our 60 machine mega test. Well, this is the result. These are the best of 2018. Welcome to the autoX show.
Before we get to our best of 2018 panel discussion, we look at BMW's 7th generation 3 Series.
Right, quick disclaimer before we begin. This is the brand new 7th generation BMW 3 Series. Disclaimer, why? Well, I'm not entirely sure I can be completely objective about this car. See, I've owned an E30 3 Series from the late 80s, I've had an E36 from the 90s, and I've had the previous generation F30 from the 2000s. So I might be a little bit emotionally involved with these machines. Now this, the 7th generation, it's bigger, it's more brawny, it's muscular. BMW says they have gone back to its roots. This goes back to being the ultimate sports sedan. And that's why I'm in Portugal. I want to find out if this 3 Series can go back to its roots and be the best sports sedan out there. Even in this day and age of SUVs, the 3 Series is the mainstay of the BMW brand. They say this is their heartbeat. Right, before we drive the car, a little bit about the styling. You've seen it from the front, it looks much beefier, much chunkier, much more muscular, a little bit like the new 5 Series even from the front. Along the side, in profile, and around the back, looks much more svelte, much cleaner looking. You can see the Hofmeister kink right here. The wheel arches are a little bit more pronounced. This particular car, the 330i M Sport, is sitting on 19-inch rims and it looks really hunkered down, really muscular. This particular car is in Portimao blue. Now remember the word Portimao because we'll get to that in a bit. Now, new 3 Series is a lot bigger. 40mm extra, or 41mm to be exact, wheelbase, 76mm in length and 16mm in width. So it is a nicer place to be inside the cabin. And it is absolutely beautiful in here. Every single thing that you would touch, the quality of the materials are fantastic. And it looks much more minimalistic, much more modern, and certainly a step up from the previous generation. Currently, I'm sitting facing 2 massive screens, a digital instrument cluster, and a big massive infotainment screen, the iDrive screen on top of the center console. Now, traditionally, typically, these cars have had big, massive analog gauges for the last 40 years. So traditionalists may not be very happy with that digital instrument cluster, but actually, I think it works really, really well. I love the 2 big analog gauges, but these particular gauges, the digital screen with the speedo on the left and the tach on the right, works really well when you're out there on the road because it frees up the space in the middle for a lot more information. So you can have navigation up there, you've got a much bigger head-up display over there, and you've got BMW's infotainment system, and it's got a couple of tricks up its sleeve. So, hey BMW, I'm bored.
I can't imagine that. Maybe you haven't yet had the chance to try sport mode.
Voila. So we've got sport mode. I'm sitting in the driver's seat. I really, really, really am itching to get out there. Right, so we are finally on the road. We're in the hills in the Algarve region of Portugal. And as I said, we're in the 330i in the M Sport. So not only does this have the more aggressive body kit, but this also has the M Sport suspension. We're sitting on 19-inch wheels, so low profile, lots and lots and lots of grip. So this car may have become bigger and more comfortable, but it's also 55 kilos lighter than the previous generation. 2 engines which will come to India in the middle of next year. One is the 320D with the 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine that produces just under 190 horsepower and 400 Nm of torque. This one has the 2-liter turbocharged petrol engine that produces 255 horsepower and 400 Nm of torque. So I started out earlier in the 320D, and admittedly I was a little bit underwhelmed. See, BMW has been building up this car saying that it is their ultimate sports sedan. It is the best 3 Series ever. It's the 3 Series that gets back to its roots of being the ultimate sports sedan. Now, the 320D that I drove earlier today was extremely refined, extremely smooth. I challenge anybody to sit in the driver's seat and tell me that there's a diesel engine in the front of that car. All cars have as standard specification what they call acoustic windshields. So it's a windshield that insulates you from the outside world. The cars that we're driving have the option of acoustic side windows as well. Even more insulation, even more refinement, even lower NVH. And the 320D that we drove earlier today felt extremely grown up, extremely mature. The reason I was underwhelmed is because the previous generation 2-liter turbocharged diesel engine would have a little bit of lag, and then the turbo would spool up and it would give you a shove in the back. So there would be this surge of power. It would that acceleration that you got after the turbo kicked in would throw you back in the seat a little bit, and it would add a little bit of excitement, a little bit of drama. This time around, BMW has tried to make the engine extremely linear in the way it delivers power. So it's very progressive and very linear in the way that the torque is distributed across the rev range. So there's no sense of it being a turbocharged motor anymore. There's no sense of it being a diesel motor anymore. So it's very refined, very grown up. But the flip side of that is that it doesn't really get under your skin when you're driving it. So it feels more like a luxury car, and especially since we've got this additional amount of space in the cabin. You've got a beautifully laid out interior. You've got everything that is really, really nice to the touch. It feels like a grown-up, mature luxury car rather than a bare bones sports sedan. Why that works in BMW's favor is because, well, most of you, that's what you want from your 3 Series. You want a car that's comfortable, that's quiet, that's luxurious, but it doesn't go back to the DNA that they've been trying to instill into the 7th generation of this car. And that's what brings me to the car I'm driving right now, because this is the 330i M Sport. It's got the M Sport suspension. It's more hunkered down. It has 255 horsepower. It's much more urgent in the way it delivers power. It's got more power, of course, but even the way the revs rise, the way this 8-speed ZF gearbox, which I think is the best gearbox in the world for a daily driver anyway, is more instant. It's more responsive. The revs build all the way to 6,500 RPM. This car feels sharper. It feels more involving. It's more fun to drive. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, because the 320D is the car that will sell the most in India. It works as more of a mature luxury machine. This one with the M Sport suspension and the 19-inch rims is going to be way too harsh and aggressive to use on the road every day. But the 330i in standard spec would, for me, be the ultimate compromise, because it's got just enough power to have a little bit of fun with. Although I have to say that the reason I love this chassis is because it's got 50-50 weight distribution, because it is completely balanced. You can throw the tail out at will and you can have a little bit of fun. But with this car, it has so much grip that to get it to be wayward, you have to be doing insane amounts of speed. So hopefully that's what we're going to do tomorrow at the Portimao circuit. And I'm waiting to get onto the track to see how this thing behaves when you're truly at the limit.
You gotta get into the groove.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, we're heading out on the Portimao circuit in the M340i X-Drive. So this is the 3-liter turbocharged inline 6-cylinder engine. Does 0 to 100 in 4.4 seconds. That is proper sports car territory. And this is an incredible racetrack. It's like a roller coaster ride. Here's my problem. This car is so tremendously capable that for me to push it to its limits, I need to be doing insane speeds. What you can tell when pushing this chassis is the fact that it is lighter. It does feel very, very light on its feet. It feels very willing to change direction. It feels very, very willing to listen to your inputs. My only complaint, if I have a small complaint, is that for me, inherently, the beauty of the 3 Series is a slow speed slide. Everything from the E30 to the E36 to the E46 to the E90 to the F30, the previous or the current generation, allows you at slow speed to just play with the chassis, just fiddle with it a little bit to make you feel a little bit alive when you're behind the wheel without having to kill yourself doing crazy speeds. This one now is so capable that to get it to slide, you have to be doing insane speeds. The advantage here is that it is so capable that to get yourself out of shape, to get yourself into trouble is near impossible. Right, time's up for the track. Can't say I didn't enjoy it. Do I wish it were a little more playful? Yes, I do. Is it immensely just crazy capable? Yes, it is. Now, in the autoX Best of 2018 panel discussion, we sit down with some of the most senior leaders in the Indian automotive industry. On my right is Mr. YK Koo, Managing Director and CEO, Hyundai India. Mr. Sergey Canovas, Managing Director, Ducati India. On my left is Mr. Rahil Ansari, Head Audi India, and Mr. CV Raman, Senior Executive Director, Maruti Suzuki. Welcome, gentlemen. Let's jump straight in. EVs are the buzzword in the automotive industry at the moment. Both Audi and Hyundai have committed to launching full EVs in the near future. What does the government need to do to make it a more enabling environment to see more such EV launches sooner rather than later?
Well, I think from a luxury perspective, clearly we need to see the infrastructure moving up quickly. I think the announcement of bringing EVs and setting up the infrastructure has been made already long time back. The infrastructure setup has to grow rapidly on the one hand. On the other hand, and that's one of the major things, is like a framework has to come in. At the beginning, the discussion was, okay, there's going to be a framework. In between, there was a discussion that there's not going to be a framework, not a policy happening. And now we're back to basically there's going to be a framework, which is good, actually. I think the framework is very important because it's essential for the OEMs to know what is coming up, how are you going to develop a car, does it fit to the Indian environment or not? Because the risk is if you launch a car and it does not, and the policy is changed afterwards or is implemented afterwards, you may end up in having a car which is not compliant and you need to redo that work, which actually takes a lot of time.
India needs to look at energy security. We need to look at the environment. We need to look at the infrastructure, and we need to look at the customer. So these are the 4 stakeholders or things which we need to, kind of evolve. And looking at the data, I think it's very clear that energy security is paramount as far as India is concerned, especially the change in crude prices and the kind of foreign exchange variations which we have got. India has a small car market, and 70% of the cars which are made in India are small cars, having an average price of about 500,000 or 550,000 rupees. The absorption ratio for an electric vehicle, I think, is something which is a question mark at this point of time for the customer. So intervention from demand incentive is definitely something which is there, which is as per the FAME 1 scheme, it is already available. No, but having said that, how do we make things in India? So that's the government perspective of Make in India. And if we have to do that, I think there is a technology agnostic approach which is very, very important. And therefore, we need to look at various types of technologies which are available and which need to be worked in for India. And the industry is working with Niti Aayog and with the government agencies like MORTH and MOHI to look at these various interventions. And it could be alternate fuels, it could be hybridization, it could be electrification of the fleet. And I don't just say EV, I say electrification of the fleet. Yeah. And there is an ecosystem which is today available for an IC engine, but there is a transition which is required when you need to move forward from an infrastructure perspective and also from the customer's acceptance point of view. And so that's something I think we need to look at. And therefore, a long-term policy is important. From emission, where do we want to be in 2022, 2027? The Niti Aayog has said very clearly 30% electric vehicles for passenger cars by 2030, 100% of two-wheelers, 100% of buses by 2030. So I think that's the imperative. So where do we move first? And so from energy security, if you look at, the petrol consumption is the largest as far as the two-wheeler is concerned, 62%. And so rightly, China has gone 100% electric as far as the two-wheelers is concerned. And so they see a lot of value on that perspective. So I think it's important to look at data, look at various facets of it, and the customer has to be centric. And we need to make a solution which is important and which is giving best value for the customer.
Mr. Ku, you're bringing in the Kona EV. Who do you expect to be the target customer for that vehicle?
Electric vehicle is not the choice, the direction we have to take. And there's a global trend, including Indian market. Zero emission is very important for India in consideration air polluted situation. So we are on the consideration to develop some new EV product based on the Kona on the CKD basis in next 2019, which already communicate to the public. But actually the to develop and to produce Kona EV, the main purpose for this is for test the product and for test the market, because still India is not ready to accept some electric vehicle because the infrastructure and even the battery and some support. Even the phase 1 is almost over, but they continue the phase 1 strategy at this moment, and we are waiting for phase 2, what kind of support we OEM expect from the government. That also very crucial direction which we can get more. The government should encourage and motivate OEM to develop electric vehicles. That's most important. So we are asking the government and we are asking the Niti Aayog, who is in charge of the electric vehicle, to give more support and some incentive, even maybe GST and some to reduce import duty for the CKD part for the EV product. That also is very strong support to OEM to start the EV policy.
Well, I think that on two wheels, we always follow what is going on in four wheels. And as mentioned here in China, for the cities, the bikes or the two wheels need to be electric. So we are going to follow what is the market doing. And indeed, we presented a couple of weeks ago the first race bike, which is electric. And we presented on a race. So we are working on that. And of course, we are relying also on the group that we belong to develop this strategy. But specifically on bikes, it's also very important to develop what is safety. And right now we are very much focused on this aspect, which is a very short-term interest that we have. Mm-hmm.
Right, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to the autoX show. You mentioned the topic of safety. Do you find that safety is becoming a larger priority in the Indian market? Are consumers actually going into dealerships and making purchase decisions based on the safety of a vehicle or safety features that are available?
Yeah, definitely. I think safety is becoming important. One is, of course, the government has brought in the regulations of side crash as well as the pedestrian. So which is going to, every vehicle is going to be post 2019 is going to have all of this. Safety is something which people need to understand. And it's not just about making safe cars. I think it's also about making safety as a culture where people need to understand that they need to belt up, whether front seat or rear seat. If you don't, any number of airbags is not going to help you. So I think those are things also which need to happen along with the safety movement. That yes, vehicles are going to become safe. The infrastructure, the traffic management, and also needs to be improved. And so therefore, I think it's the education of the customer is also very, very important. So I think this is a progression which is going to happen, and we are just likely to catch up with Europe in the next 3 to 5 years.
Criteria for the customer to choose the product and the model. And earlier it was the fuel efficiency and maybe the price and the power, air condition. But now I think the trend is different. So safety first. But now they're changing their trend. So if they have the more safety, like the ABS standard, and maybe the airbag, single or dual airbag, they prefer this kind of safety item. If they pay some more amount, so they prefer the safety. So even the government is taking some very strong action for the safety and some of the cafe. I think that's a very good direction. Even the ABS is a must to apply from April for the new product and existing from the July for 2019. So I think the ABS and the airbag also is very important for safety item for the product.
Also, in our case, in which the rider is more fragile than in a car, we took long time ago, the statement of not being an option. So it comes with the bikes. It needs to come with the bikes, and that's having a performance bike. It's not complicated, but having a safe bike, it's quite challenging. So that has been the main concern for us, and there's no way in which you can choose with safety features or without safety features. They come all with safety features. It's very important. One thing that we do, for example, is that if anybody comes to try our bike, right now has the chance also to try the bike with our gear. So we offer the gear, and then we can explain also what are the advantage, and in case of bikes, for example, also how much is comfortable compared to other things. But that's let's say that it's not the flashy part. They come from performance, and our responsibility in this case is to explain what is the advantage of the safety, and making sure that they don't have to use it anytime.
There's been a lot of talk about ease of doing business and that aspect improving in India. On ground, do you find any improvement? Is ease of doing business actually increasing or improving?
Well, in general, I think that the actions taken last year make things much easier. I mean, GST is a clear example. So I think that from this perspective, it's positive. Still things to be improved, like let's say random taxation based on origin of the products, but should be addressed on the import duties and not once the product is inside. But I see a positive trend. I think that on the ranking, India is improving. So all these kind of activities are definitely welcome.
You mentioned about GST. I think that definitely was a game changer, which has actually brought in a lot of things. It was also in terms of say take a simple example of transportation. The kind of changes which are happening in terms of removal of the octroi or the tolls, that kind of a thing is actually helping the business. You can actually see a more turnaround for the trucks. So simple examples like this are showing that yes, the ease of doing business is there is an improvement which is there. So hopefully, I think with these kind of interventions the government is bringing in, definitely I think the ranking will further improve.
What is the perception of India in global boardrooms today? What is the level of importance that's being given to the Indian market, and how does top management at a global level see the market moving forward?
GST was a good move, in fact, and facilitated a lot of things for the automotive industry, especially in the luxury segment. Unfortunately, for the luxury segment, there were a couple of other changes afterwards, which was the cess hike in September last year, and then also the change in the union budget. So that impacted in a higher price again. That's, according to us, not really a fair approach, because we consider ourselves Make in India. And if you have established a local assembly, and if you have invested in the country and are adding value, we're paying tax here, we're generating a lot of tax revenue over here, you can be considered Make in India. Now, transferred into global boardroom, the luxury segment has not grown to that extent like it should be, and that's mainly also because the taxes are not as favorable for the luxury industry. We're looking at a 1.2% market share overall from the entire business, so it's very small. To look at then always the luxury segment as the one that should have an increased tax, I don't actually understand that discussion, because we're talking about a market that has 35 to 40,000 units only. Yes, the tax revenue or the revenue impact is a bigger one, but that you can increase if you drop the taxes for this. You can increase also the amount of cars that we're selling, generating more investments in the country in terms of products, dealerships, and hiring manpower. So of course, in global boardrooms and coming then also to our perspective, that has had an impact because the expectation level of the development for the Indian market in the luxury segment was much higher. Has come a little bit down. Fortunately, we all know that India is a strong market and is a strategic market, and will grow at some stage. Also in the luxury segment, so we're still very positive, but of course we also expect a certain change in this because the investments that have been made were substantial. So the expectation level from the board is also clear that there have to be some returns at some point in time.
I think that I agree with you. I think that when you talk about the headquarter, the first thing that you need to do is to make them understand what is India and what are the challenges of India. Once you have done that, then it's much easier because, as Rahil said, that's a market that sooner or later will grow exponentially. I think that is not in our case. It's more like a leisure product. So you need to create the environment to use the bike. It's very important to be positioned properly here because the potential is there. And then, of course, you need to work with the government. You need to go with the authorities to make sure that safety is improving. And then you give chance to people to spend money on bikes, for example, or in luxury cars. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been a very insightful session, and I wish you all the best for the year end and for 2019. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We come to you from the studio with just enough time to say, well, that's all the time we have for you today. But coming up next week on the autoX show, we check out Audi's first brand new production electric vehicle, the e-tron. And Nissan kicks it up a notch with the Kicks SUV. Now remember, it's chaos out there, so make sure you buckle up and always wear your helmets. We'll see you again next week on the autoX show.